Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Last Furcht und Pain, which translates to leave, fear, and pain. Apologies for not being able to find a translation, or maybe more of a literal, this is more of a literal translation rather than it being one that's more so connected to the actual meaning of the text, which is the translations that I tend to use based on my research. But there wasn't a translation for this text, unfortunately, so have to make do with what I have. Definitely an interesting chorale. This last phrase here is something that's definitely worth talking about when we get to it. Not that I wouldn't have in the first place. That's sort of the whole point of these videos, but other than that, it's kind of interesting how the form of this chorale and yesterday's chorale is very similar. Strung together short phrases with this long contrapuntal suspension-oriented phrase at the end. I wonder if there is a reason behind that, but let's just hop right into the analysis. We have three sharps in the key signature. We start on F sharp minor and we end on F sharp minor. Very interesting to end a minor chorale on a minor chord. But that being said, I do think the overall tonality of this chorale is F sharp minor. After these passing tones in the melody and the tenor, we have another F sharp minor chord, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A. No need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the bass, and then we get a series of passing tones. Remember, these are 16th notes, so this is subdividing the quarter note 4 times. A, C sharp, F sharp, and A. It's like taking the chord and putting it in first inversion very briefly, so I'll go ahead and put that there, along with another passing tone in the bass as well. We then get C sharp, E sharp, and G sharp, which is our 5 chord C sharp major, passing 7th in the tenor here, as well as a leap down in the bass, the distance of an octave, so it doesn't really change the analysis there, because the C sharp is a chord tone. And our first cadence is a deceptive cadence. Very interesting. We cadence on D major, D, A, F sharp, and F sharp, which is a 6 chord in the key of F sharp minor. Then the next phrase is short, still in the key of F sharp minor. This is a perfect authentic cadence. We start things off with B minor over D. We have D, B, F sharp, and F sharp. Guess you could make the argument this is G sharp diminished as well, but I mark that as a passing tone. I just hear this as a 4-6 chord. We then have C sharp, F, and A, which is F sharp minor over C sharp. That's a 1-6-4 chord. We also see it's not as deliberate of an interruption as we've been seeing recently, but notice how Bach still uses that lower neighbor tone as an ornament in between the two C sharps, even when it's part of a subdivision like it is here. He still does that, which is pretty cool. Neighbor tone in the bass, which I will mark. And then we have C sharp, E sharp, and G, which is our 5 chord. Typically what we would expect after our 1-6-4 chord. Passing 7th again in the tenor, and then we cadence on F sharp minor, F sharp, A, C sharp, and F sharp. Tonic triad. Next phrase, half cadence in the key of F sharp minor, no modulations just yet. We start things off with another tonic triad, F sharp, A, F sharp, and C. And then we go to G, B, F sharp, and B. And I'm not even going to hedge my bets and say that there is a possibility that this is a 2-7 chord. If this were a 2-7 chord, I think a D natural would be an essential tone somewhere in here. And we get the doubling of the B going on, which makes me feel like this E sharp is our chord tone. This F sharp here has to be a 7-6 suspension over the bass, or at least contributing to the 7-6 suspension over the bass. But that being said, I do think this is E sharp diminished in first inversion. That would be a 7-6 chord, and then we get 1-6 on the other side of it. A, C sharp, F sharp, and A. 1-7-6-1. Very staple chord progression in Bach in both directions, 1-6-7-6-1, or vice versa. We see this pattern even mapped onto other chords like 4-3-6-4-6 or 3-2-6-3-6 all the time. I talk about it a ton in my videos. Check out some of my older videos if you want to hear me talk about it more at length. We have another passing tone in the bass here before we get C sharp, E sharp, carried over from the alto here, and G sharp, which is C sharp major. That's our 5 chord. And then we get our first phrase that has substantially longer length, that has more real estate going on before we get a cadence, and it also ends in the key of F sharp minor. Now there is an argument to be made here that we do modulate to the key of A major briefly. However, I actually just analyzed this entire phrase in F sharp minor. The more that I listen to it, Bach just comes back around to F sharp minor on the other side, and I kind of had this realization that when Bach is following the chord progression that he uses in a minor key, like this minor cycle of falling fifths, inherently the progression is going to sound like the relative major is being tonicized at some point. So given the context, I do think he stays in F sharp minor for the entirety of this phrase, but there is an argument to be made that he does take a slight detour to A major depending on how you hear it. I mean, I originally heard it that way, but the more that I listen to it, the more that I feel like the placement of this E sharp here just feels too much like it's keeping us in the realm of F sharp minor for the A major modulation to feel necessary, as well as this G natural here. So let's talk about it. So we start things off with C sharp major, no need to reanalyze. Then we get F sharp minor, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A. That's our tonic triad with a passing seventh in the bass. And then we get D, D, F sharp, and A. That's a 6th chord, and this is going to, this is not the chord that's going to start our progression. Another passing seventh in the bass, and then we get D, D, F sharp, and B. So similar to the last chord, but we have a B in the melody here that turns the chord into 4/6. That's B minor in first inversion. Passing tone here, a little brief decorative tone in the tenor. This G sharp's a non-chord tone. This A is a non-chordal, it's a chordal seventh, but a non-chord tone. This F sharp is a chord tone, so we will leave it unmarked. And then we start our cycle of falling fifths progression. And I think if you are going to analyze in the key of A major, and I'll write in the secondary analysis afterwards, this is where you would start right here. Or I suppose you could start with the D major as well. You could analyze this entire phrase in A major if you so willed it that way, but I don't really feel like we're in the key of A major here, even though it kind of sounds like we get the idea of A major being the I guess the destination point of this rising melodic line. There are just too many things present that keep us from getting A major as a fully contextualized by itself tonic to make the modulation seem worth it in this context, which might go against some of the things that I've done in other videos. I don't know, there's an argument to be made. There's definitely some nebulousness going on here. So continuing in the key of F sharp minor, we have E, E, G sharp, and B. That is a subtonic seventh, E major with a passing seventh in the tenor. And then we get A major, A, C sharp, G, and C sharp. So this is the first thing that kind of makes me feel like we never quite get A major, and Bach just turns the dial back towards F sharp minor, because this G right here is a 7/6 suspension over the bass. However, by the time we get the resolution, this F sharp here, the bass doesn't change and it turns it back into sort of an F sharp minor chord. So I think the overall tonality could be a 3/7 chord. It could also be a tonic triad in first inversion. They're both very similar chords to one another. It really just depends on how you hear it. But because F sharp is brief, I really do feel like A major does feel like the resolution of this 7/3 progression. But after our 3/7 chord, we go to kind of an interesting place. We go to C sharp major, G sharp, B, E sharp, and C sharp, which is C sharp 7 over G sharp. That's a 5/4/3 chord. Sometimes we see 3 go to 5. It's one of the lesser common predominant chords, but you know, it's very similar to 1/6, and because it's being presented in this contrapuntal fashion, you know, with a suspension going on, it's almost like it is a 1 chord. So really, it's like an F sharp minor chord is going to this 5 chord in the first place. But the 5 chord does resolve the way we would expect. We get F sharp, we get A, we get another F sharp, and of course C sharp. That's a tonic triad in root position, so 5 going to 1, that's good. There's just some counterpoint going on here. It's less common, but still very beautiful chord progression. Then we get F sharp, D, G sharp, and B. That's G sharp minor 7 flat 5 over F sharp, which is 2/4/2. Very interesting, but 2 does resolve where we would expect it to. This resolves to a first inversion C sharp major chord. We have E sharp, C sharp, both. This is a neighbor tone, this is an anticipation. Sorry, the bass looked like an anticipation to me, but it's not. It is a neighbor tone. And we also have G sharp and B, which is 5, 6, 5, a C sharp 7 over E sharp, but still the 4-2 chord resolving to a first inversion chord that is a fifth below it. That's exactly where 4-2 chords want to resolve, because the 7th of the chord is in the bass. And that goes where we would expect it to, or does it? We get F sharp, A, G sharp, and A. And again, Bach deceptive suspensions going on here. The suspension does resolve the way we would expect a 9/8 suspension. However, the bass changes and introduces D along with D here in the tenor as well. So we have D, D, F sharp, and A, another deceptive progression. Very interesting. I guess you could analyze this as 6/6 as well, but I'm going to analyze it as 6 in root position, because by the time we get the resolution to this suspension, the bass has changed to root position. So the deceptive progression starting the chorale off, the deceptive progression making an appearance later in the chorale as well. Cool stuff. Moving ahead to the second system, and what I'm making the argument as the end of the A section perhaps, is our cadence. So we have B, D, F sharp, and G sharp. It's another G sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord, but this time it's in first inversion, and we know we're going to see a chord like that in a perfect authentic cadence, especially at some point, at least most of the time. This B and this D, those are both non-chord tones, or sorry, this G sharp and this B are both chord tones, so we don't need to mark them. And then we get C sharp, G sharp, E sharp, and G sharp, which is a 5 chord C sharp major, and then this C sharp is a chord tone as well, so we don't need to mark it. And then we cadence on F sharp minor, F sharp, A, C sharp, and F sharp. Tonic triad, root position. 2, 6, 5, 1 doesn't get more standard than that. Bach would have been a jazz guy for sure. That being said, we do get kind of an interesting cadence. We do see kind of an allusion to the form that we saw earlier, right, with these short, like 4-beat phrases that Bach starts the chorale off with. And he doesn't go quite as extensively with 3 in a row, but we get 2 in a row followed by a longer phrase. So this is a half cadence in the key of F sharp minor. We're cadencing on C sharp major here. We get another F sharp minor chord, F sharp, A, F sharp, and C sharp with a passing 7th in the bass. No need to reanalyze. And then we get D, B, F sharp, and D. That's B minor over D. That's a 4/6 chord. This C sharp, and this E sharp here are all non-chord tones, but because 3 of the voices are moving, especially the bass moving at the same time, I do feel compelled to see if a chord is analyzable as a subdivided part of the chord progression, and I do think that's what's happening here. We do have a C sharp 7 chord. It is incomplete because there's no G sharp in this chord, but that's totally okay for chords that are major or minor, that have major or minor triads as their foundation. But after our 5/7 chord, we do get a secondary dominant here. We have B sharp, D sharp, F sharp, and A, with this anticipation here in the melody, which could also be considered as a chord tone, depending on how you look at it. But I analyze this as 7 fully diminished of 5, because B sharp is the leading tone to C sharp, and C sharp is our 5 chord, as we know. However, if you look at this A as the non-chord tone, and this G sharp is our chord tone, that could be 5/6/5 of 5 as well, but 7/7 versus 5/6/5, they're functioning the exact same, and for all intents and purposes, the chords are interchangeable, both in function and in tone, because they share 3 of the 4 notes in common. But we do get the 5 chord on the other side. That's what really matters. C sharp, E sharp carried over from the alto here, and G sharp, C sharp major. And then we get our first modulation. Oh, and something I forgot to do. I forgot to analyze this here. So walking it back, sorry, try and take your brain back to earlier in the chorale when I said I would do this secondary analysis. This would be 2/6/5, this would be 5, and this would be some type of either deceptive progression, or you could call this a 1 chord with some type of suspension, like so. I'll go ahead and put that there if you want to do the secondary analysis like that. If you do hear it as a 2-5-1 in A major, which it totally is, that's another way to analyze it. I just am not entirely convinced in this case. It just feels like F sharp minor just subverts the A major being the resolution. And I think Bach is he just has that fluid relationship with the harmony, and he's very crafty, or he was very crafty, and his progressions inject all sorts of twists and turns that are unexpected. It shows that he had a very, like I said, fluid relationship with the harmony. But starting things off in the next phrase, we're going to be moving to the key of E major for our first modulation. You could hear this as a half cadence, I suppose, in the key of A major as well, but I hear it in the key of E major, especially with D sharps being so prevalent from the beginning. So we start off the phrase with A, C sharp, F sharp, and C sharp, which is our tonic triad, F sharp minor in first inversion, fulfilling the resolution that we have from our half cadence, 5 going to 1, and this is where Bach, straight out the gate, goes to E major. It becomes our 2-6 chord, and it also helps that we have E natural. It's not essential, but the fact that we don't have E sharp going on, I guess further added to the fact that we have D sharp on the other side of the E natural, that tells me that there's something going on here. It's either we have some very atypical modality going on, like F sharp Dorian, something like that, or we're moving towards the realm of E major, or E major is getting tonicized. It just so happens we're moving to E major. So we get B, F sharp, D sharp, and B. That's our 5 chord B major in root position. Passing tones in the alto and the bass before we get D sharp, B, F sharp, and A. That's taking our B major chord, adding a 7th, and putting it in first inversion. This is B7 over D sharp, which is a 6-5. I'm putting the 7 there to, I guess, be a little bit more granular with my figured bass, something that I've been trying to do at least in the last several videos, because 6-5 gets the point across, but 7-6-5 also illustrates the fact that we're adding the 7th there. So a little redundant, but a little bit more specific as well. And then we have B and D sharp as well. It kind of turns the chord into root position, but we do get rid of the 5th. Then again, we don't really need the 5th in a 7 chord. I'm just not going to bother marking it. It's there. It doesn't really feel super impactful to me. Even though the bass is moving, I'm just not going to bother. It kind of does happen. That's one of the benefit of talking about analysis over a video, because I can mention it. It doesn't need to make its way onto the page. But regardless, we do cadence on E major, E, B, E, and G sharp. And we are going to immediately start things off with kind of an, well, for starters, this phrase is very interesting, but there is room for debate regarding where we're going. So I think we do start things off in the key of F sharp minor. You could make the argument that this is still in the key of E major and we're just tonicizing a 2 chord. That's totally fine. But I think given the chord progression that's following, it's interesting. It really is interesting what's going on here, and we do have an kind of a questionable modulation zone, because Bach is eventually going to go to the key of D major, and I don't think he immediately goes from E major to D major. That's just not what it sounds like. These first 3 beats do sound like F sharp minor, which is why I have it analyzed as a direct modulation, and we just start things off with C sharp major over E sharp, which is 5-6, and we do kind of get a root position version of that on the and, because we get C sharp and E sharp here, and then we have a fully intact chord. So I'll go ahead and mark that. And that goes where we would expect: F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A. And then we get the 1 going to 6 progression. I believe we saw this earlier. F sharp, D, A, and A. That's 6-6 more specifically. D sharp major in first inversion. And then we get the root position version here. Now this is where I analyze the modulation. So I do think that, I'll say that it happens over the course of this beat. So I'll just mark this here, and I'll just say that in the key of D major, which is not a distant modulation from the key of E major, is the point where we're going to D, because D major is also 1 in the key of D major, of course. After we make our move to D major, that sort of explains why we have D going to G here. I suppose you could look at each one of these pairs of dominant followed by the chord that it is the dominant of as its own little sub modulation, but I do think this is all explainable in the key of D major. It's almost explainable in the key of A major or F sharp minor as well, but this does sort of feel like D major to me for a couple of reasons. One is this G natural here. The difference between F sharp minor and I guess D major is the G natural versus the G sharp, or yeah, the G natural versus the G sharp. And then we also have G natural later on in the phrase as well, which sort of was the last piece of evidence that I needed to commit to D major being what's happening at the end here. It definitely does sound like something has changed, and I reckon it was a move to a key that was unexpected. Also, coincidentally, it's the key that made the deceptive progression feel deceptive at the beginning of the chorale, so it's almost symbolic to see F sharp go to D major at the end. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I do analyze this in the key of D major. There are alternative outlooks as well. But G major is our 4 chord. This B is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. Then we get E major, G sharp, E, B, and B, which is secondary dominant, 5/6 of 5, because E is the dominant of A, and A is our 5 chord. And the chord gets turned into root position on the and here with E, E, G sharp, and B. The chord's entirely intact, so I'll put it on the page. And then we have A, E, A, and C sharp, which is our 5 chord, A major. With this passing G natural here, like I mentioned earlier, this is what makes me feel like we're in the key of D major, because the A is functioning like a dominant. It's either we're in D major or we have some type of Phrygian going on. That's what I feel like is ultimately happening. But after our 5 chord, this C sharp is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. We get A sharp, F sharp, F sharp, and C sharp. That's another secondary dominant in first inversion. That would be 5/6 of 6, because F sharp is the 5 or the dominant of B. And B we expect to be minor on the other side because we're in the key of D major, and 6 is of minor quality. This E is a passing 7th, very similar to what's going on here on this beat. We get a passing 7th and the skipping down a third. Just in this case we have the bass and the tenor moving. And then we have B minor, B, D, F sharp, and B, which is our 6 chord in root position, which fulfills or continues along this pattern of root position, 5/6 root position, 5/6 root position. And I do think this is where we go back to the key of F sharp minor, where B minor is now our 4 chord. We also have C sharp here and E sharp here, which does give us a bit of a 5/4/2 sort of vibe going on in the key of F sharp minor, but I don't think that's exactly how it's functioning. It's also the bass isn't moving as well. It's what creates the 4/2, and sort of what's happening after the fact makes me feel like this is all just contrapuntal, and it's really just sort of accompanying the texture. Notice how the alto changes what it's doing here, tenor changes what it's doing here. This feels like a 4 going to something else. So 4 goes to B sharp, D sharp, F sharp, and A, which I'm making the argument because the B sharp is sort of continuing this idea of secondary dominance. This is 7 fully diminished of 5, because we did see 7 of 5 earlier, spelled in actually the same way, the only difference being the bass is an octave higher than it was before. But we do have this interesting G sharp here, which I feel is just partially arpeggiating the C sharp dominant chord with G sharp. Well, I guess B sharp is not part of that chord, but I feel like G sharp is just like 5 of 5 going to 1, which does potentially mean that this chord could be analyzed instead of 7/7 of 5 as G sharp, D sharp, F, and G sharp. Yeah, not really. I suppose you could analyze this as 5/7 of 5 as well, but really when you see dominant functioning chords operate in this way, where we have 5 and 7 and the line between them sort of blurred, really what's going on here is Bach is playing with the idea of dissonance or tension that's eventually going to be resolved. The chord does resolve where we would expect it to, some semblance of a 5 chord. We have C sharp, F sharp, and G sharp, where this F sharp is a 4/3 suspension over the bass. It's this E sharp that's a chord tone. This D sharp is an embellishment, like a lower neighbor, but we are implying 5 here, C sharp major, and the chord resolves to what we would expect on the next beat, C sharp, E sharp, and G sharp, so no need to reanalyze. Another passing 7th in the tenor before we have a perfect authentic cadence with not one major, but one minor, which is typically what you would expect of a perfect authentic cadence in a minor key, but at the end of a chorale, especially when we're in a minor key, we would expect a major triad. So Bach breaking the mold a little bit. Perhaps there's something going on in the text, or he's trying to evoke a particular emotion, or he's just trying to blend into the next key that's going to be present in the next movement. But other than that, that's all I really wanted to say about today's chorale. Couple of points of contention. This F sharp modulation here, whether we even go to F sharp, is I think up for debate. We could analyze this entire phrase in D major. However, when I see E sharp, I don't think D major. I think F sharp, especially an F sharp minor more specifically, because the chorale has been in the key of F sharp. So this G major and these G naturals definitely threw me for a loop, but were explainable at the end of the day when we started to look at the chorale through the lens of D major. But all in all, very interesting chorale. Did we analyze, or did we modulate to A major here? Who knows? I think it's possible that we did. Given different circumstances, I might have even analyzed it that way, but I ultimately decided against it. Not that that is the exact analysis, but there's definitely some room for debate here. But other than that, the chorale is more or less straightforward. Interesting points in which he modulates. He goes a very long time without modulating in this particular chorale, so definitely interesting, unique profile, even though it has a similar form than the chorale that we looked at yesterday, which you should check out if you have not already. But with that being said, if you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You could also hit the notification icon if you'd like to be notified of my daily upload. But with all that being said, thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.